I used to think success would make me more lovable, but then I realized, for some people, your success is just an excuse for them to take even more from you. I never expected that the first phone call from my mother that day, the woman who had never once praised me, would be the start of an elaborate plan disguised as familial love. And it all began with what seemed like an innocent sentence. "Mia, I found a place that's right on your way to work." Yes. I should have been suspicious from that moment, but like any child desperate for recognition, I nodded far too quickly. Because I had no idea that apartment would be a trap, wrapped in both love and betrayal. My name is Mia Weston, 32 years old, recently promoted to head of strategic client relations at Lexton & Myers, one of the top financial consulting firms in Massachusetts. For the first time, my salary hit 6 figures. But the price I paid was 4 hours a day stuck in traffic on the crowded lanes of I-95. Every morning I'd wake up at 5:00 a.m., gulp down a quick coffee, and race to the parking lot in Quincy to catch the train into Boston. I worked until late, came home with an aching back and sore legs, and repeated the cycle like a machine. After 2 weeks, I knew it wasn't sustainable. That Saturday evening, like always, I drove to my parents' home in Braintree for our family dinner, a tradition I'd never skipped, even though I often felt like a stranger under that roof. Mom was in the kitchen, flipping her signature BBQ glazed ribs, and Dad sat in his old recliner reading the Globe. Everything looked just like it did 20 years ago. Except me. And no one seemed to notice that. "How's the new job?" my mom asked as she placed the aromatic tray of ribs on the table. "It's great. I really like it, but the commute? It's brutal," I said while pouring water into a glass. My parents exchanged a quick glance, that flash of eye contact I'd grown to resent. I used to think it symbolized marital understanding. Now I call it the accomplice signal. And this time, it meant something was coming. Mom wiped her hands on a striped towel, sat down across from me, and sighed, her voice heavy with implication. "Do you remember Grandma Margaret's old apartment? The one on Mayflower Street? It's just 10 minutes from your office, by foot." I looked up, my heart skipping a beat. Of course I remembered. That's where I used to play with Barbie dolls on the hardwood floor, where Grandma baked vanilla cookies and taught me tic-tac-toe. The apartment was small but cozy, on the second floor of an old building, with a balcony that overlooked a street lined with crimson maple trees in the fall. "You're serious?" I asked, almost not believing my ears. "Absolutely," my mom smiled, her voice sugary sweet, the same tone she used to use to get me to do chores as a kid. "The last tenant just moved out last week. If you want it, I'll rent it to you. Way below market price, family discount." I hesitated briefly, then nodded eagerly, not negotiating a thing, because at that moment I thought she genuinely wanted to help me. Dad folded his newspaper, his voice laced with a hint of pride. "Well, that's settled then. Good timing. Oh, did you hear the news about your brother? Dylan just signed new contracts with 3 freight companies out west." And just like that, the conversation shifted back to Dylan, the eternal pride of the Weston family. My brother was the kind of person who could lie through his teeth and still get applauded. Every time I achieved something, they'd quickly change the subject and circle back to, "the bold son who dares to dream." Never mind the fact he'd gone bankrupt twice and still lived off our parents. I smiled without a word, no point. I was used to being the outsider, but this time I thought things might be different, at least in Grandma's old apartment, where I could finally be in charge of my own space. I didn't know then, it was all an illusion. And that apartment, which I thought would be my sanctuary, turned out to be the place where I'd learned the harshest truth. Family can be the first to betray you, if they think you have something they want. I moved into Grandma Margaret's apartment one April afternoon, cherry blossom petals drifting gently across the porch. Standing before the weathered white door, my chest tightened. Not from nostalgia, but from the heavy musty air wafting out as I pushed it open. The place was worse than I remembered. The ceiling was stained with blotches of yellow like a map of decay. The wallpaper, straight from the AITA, peeled off like flaking skin. The wooden floor groaned under every step, and the kitchen looked straight out of a B-horror film. Grease stuck between tiles, cabinet doors hanging by a hinge, and a rusted old oven I didn't dare touch. I called my mom before I even sat down. "Mom, this place..." I chose my words carefully. "I think it's going to need a lot of work." She just chuckled softly on the other end. "I told you the last tenant was a bit messy, but I'm sure you'll turn it into something wonderful. Just don't use those hideous neon colors like kids do these days." I gave a weak laugh. She didn't ask if I had the time, money, or energy to renovate the entire place, because in her eyes, I was the one who could tough it out. That night, I sat in the living room, back against a rickety wooden chair, and opened my laptop. I created a Pinterest mood board. Main palette, warm gray, soft beige, hints of navy blue. Just like me. Understated, organized, but with depth. I didn't hire help, no one offered. And honestly, I didn't want help from someone who'd just show up to take credit later. This would be my project. A place no one could enter without permission. Day by day, I lived a double life. By day, a project manager in a sleek Boston office. By night, a painter, plumber, and amateur tile specialist. First came the wallpaper removal. What I thought would take hours dragged into a week. Old glue so stubborn, I had to scrape it off inch by inch, like peeling away rotten history. Then came grouting. I learned from YouTube and probably cursed enough for my whole building to understand the process. It took me 2 months just to finish the rough work, and when I painted the final coat in the bedroom, a smoky blue softened by golden lamplight, I almost cried. Because this was mine. I ordered a pebble gray crate and barrel sofa I'd admired for over a year, a walnut dining table, cream linen chairs. In the living room I installed recessed bookshelves, measuring, drilling, mounting by myself. Every screw I drove into the wall felt like staking my claim in this world. Weekends were for treasure hunting at resale shops. Every lamp, mirror, and planter matched my original color scheme. Nothing flashy, nothing loud. Just thoughtful, deliberate beauty. 6 months passed like a steady rain, quiet but deep. On the final night before finishing, I sat on the couch, a glass of white wine in hand, soft yellow light glowing over the hand-woven rug. No more howling drafts, no more creaky boards. Just me and the silence I'd built. The next morning I invited my mom over. She stepped inside, eyes scanning every corner. I watched her fingers graze the new brass doorknob, her head tilt at the abstract painting in the kitchen. "Mia," she said slowly, and I braced for a critique. "But," she paused, looked up at me, without her usual sharpness. "It's beautiful. I didn't think you could pull this off." My chest felt like something had sunk, not from emotion, but from something else. Caution. I couldn't remember the last time my mom gave me a compliment. And it was hard to believe, this time was sincere. I smiled, hiding my doubt behind my eyes. I didn't think I could pull it off either, but clearly I did. Mom hugged me. A real hug. Not limp, not reluctant. And I stood there, frozen, unsure whether to feel warmth or fear. Because deep down, I sensed something was coming. I had spent the whole week preparing for that day, the day my mother would see the result of 6 months of sweat, sore hands, and sleepless nights. Not because I needed her praise, but because a part of me still craved recognition. Something I had never received from her in my 32 years of life. I lit a few citrus-scented candles, played soft jazz from the small speaker by the bookshelf, and adjusted the curtains so sunlight would stream into the room just the way I liked it. The apartment looked unusually beautiful that day. Not glamorous, but enough to make someone pause, breathe deeply, and not want to leave. The doorbell rang at 2:07 p.m. My mom, in a white blouse and gray jeans, stood there with a smile as light as early autumn mist. "Hi, sweetheart," she said, her voice softer than usual. I invited her in. She stepped in slowly, her eyes scanning every corner, like she was either evaluating or gathering intel. Somewhere along the way, whenever my mom looked at something I'd done, I always felt like I was being inspected, not appreciated. But this time felt different. She touched the surface of the new granite countertop, nodded when she entered the living room, ran her hand along the armrest of the sofa, paused in front of the painting I'd hung on the center wall. Right? Where the light hits best during the day. You did all of this by yourself? She asked, turning toward me. I nodded. Yes, I only hired someone to install the plumbing and wiring at the start. The rest, I did it all myself. She walked into the bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed, and ran a finger along the pillow seam. Then she stood up, turned to face me. For the first time in a long time, my mother was silent. Not the awkward kind of silence, but the kind where words aren't enough to fill the emotion. Mia, she said quietly, I'm proud of you. My heart skipped a beat. That phrase, so ordinary in millions of other families, hit me like a shock. Before I could respond, she stepped forward and hugged me. Not the ceremonial hug you give at a cousin's wedding. Not the half-hearted, let's get this over with hug. It had pressure, warmth and emotion. I froze for a few seconds, then slowly returned the embrace. Part of me wanted to believe this time it was real. You've turned this place into a real home, she whispered in my ear. I didn't know you had such good taste. I nearly laughed but held it back. Maybe that's how my mom expresses love. Awkward, flawed, but a rare form of acknowledgement. We sat and had tea in the living room for nearly an hour. She talked about memories of Grandma Margaret, the rosemary on the balcony, summer afternoons reading books. She didn't talk about me, but at least that day she saw me. Not as the well-behaved daughter who doesn't cause trouble, but as a grown woman who knew exactly what she was doing. Before leaving, Mom turned to say, I'll tell your father about the apartment, he'll be surprised. I nodded, standing in the doorway, watching her silhouette fade down the stairs. Inside, a strange feeling rose. Not quite happiness, but something delicate like hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, this time, my family would see me differently. But I was wrong. Very wrong. Because after that visit, everything began to shift. My mom never called back like she'd promised. My dad never mentioned Mia's beautiful apartment. Everything fell quiet. In an unusual way. 3 weeks later, when Dylan, my brother, filed for his third bankruptcy and moved back in with his wife, something strange began creeping in. And then, on a Wednesday evening as I came home from work, what I had sensed finally came knocking. I got the promotion news on a Monday morning, right as I took my first sip of coffee. An email from the project director popped up with a simple subject line. Congratulations, Mia. Strategic Team Lead. I thought I read it wrong, but no. It was my name. And below that, a nearly 18% raise, along with the authority to lead a 4-person team and manage our own quarterly budget. I sat in silence for a few minutes. Not out of shock, but because of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Belief in myself. For years I was used to being in the background, doing things right, doing them quietly, never making waves, never asking for more. But that day, I allowed myself to feel proud. That evening I brought the good news home, not just to share it, but because I wanted them to know I could be successful, even if I didn't open a business or pour money into vague ventures like Dylan always did. I walked into the old house in Braintree at 6:15 p.m. The air smelled of bacon and tomato sauce. The familiar scent of family dinner my mom always preserved like a ritual. Dylan was on the couch, feet up on the coffee table, scrolling through his phone. His wife, Kelsey, still carried that smug air, wearing a brand new leather jacket, even though they were clearly freeloading. I've got good news, I said once we'd all sat down. Dad looked up from his plate of meatball pasta, and Mom paused mid-pour. I got promoted to team lead. I'll be heading the strategic division starting next week. No one reacted the way I hoped. Oh? Mom nodded slightly, then turned to Dad, her voice lowering. Did you hear about Dylan? He just lost 3 logistics contracts, big clients. Those competitors are ruthless. Before I could say anything, Dylan cut in. They're playing dirty, Mom, offering prices below market value. I can't compete with million-dollar backed firms. It's not fair, Kelsey added, frowning. My husband is hard-working and smart, but they keep crushing him. I put down my fork, not out of anger, but because I felt invisible. I had just shared something that could reshape my entire career, and they were more concerned about Dylan losing yet another opportunity to fail. I just found out this morning, I tried again. I'll have my own team, my own project authority and budget. I think it's a huge step forward. That's good, Mom said without looking at me. But you know, Dylan needs support right now. His business is his passion. The whole family needs to rally around him. I looked to Dad. He kept eating, silent. The air around me felt frozen. I had the sense that if I spoke any further, I'd be the selfish one. I gave a dry smile. Carry the burden? I'd been carrying it my whole life. But no one ever asked if my shoulders were tired. Kelsey raised an eyebrow. Dylan frowned. My mom let out a sigh, like I had just said something disappointing. You're starting again, Mia. Starting what? I looked her straight in the eye. Telling the truth? Or repeating what no one here wants to hear? Family is supposed to lift each other up, my dad said in his usual flat tone. You're always calculating, cold. But Dylan, he dares to act, to take risks. I let out a dry laugh. I take responsibility. That's different from being reckless and expecting others to clean up the mess. No one replied. I finished the rest of my meal in silence, a suffocating silence, like I'd just broken a taboo. While clearing the table, I overheard my mom whispering to Kelsey in the hallway. If only Dylan could have Mia's apartment, so close to downtown, no rent to pay. They just need a bit of stability to start over. I froze on the steps. My apartment? My hand clenched around the mug handle. Maybe I misheard. Or maybe not. That night, I got home later than usual. I sat alone in my living room. Warm lights, a half-filled glass of white wine. Everything was still peaceful, still intact, just as I had built it. But deep down, I knew I had just crossed an invisible line. Because if my mother was already talking about it, she wouldn't stop. And me. I wouldn't let anyone take away the one thing I had fought to reclaim with my own hands. I knew this was coming. Not because I'm a prophet, but because I've lived long enough to understand. For Dylan, failure is never the end. It's just a short layover before returning to his favorite starting point. And that point is our parents' house. Dylan Express, his delivery company, lasted only 3 more months after the dinner where I shared my promotion news. A major corporation from Texas entered the Massachusetts market, bringing in cheap rates, same-day delivery, professional tracking apps. All things Dylan didn't have, never had, and never would. I heard the news from my cousin Rachel during lunch with coworkers. Mia, did you hear? Dylan's bankrupt again. Aunt Linda is clearing a room for him and his wife to move back in. I put my fork down. Not surprised, not angry. Just cold. I didn't wait for a call from my mom. I knew she wouldn't bother. She'd just act. And sure enough, a few days later, when I went home to grab some old boxes from the garage, my childhood room, the only safe corner I ever had in that house, had a new lock on the door. I stood in the hallway, leaning against a wall plastered with Dylan and Kelsey's wedding photos, listening to laughter from behind what used to be my door. My mom stepped out from the kitchen, wiping her hands on an apron, forcing a smile. Oh, Mia. You're back? Dylan and Kelsey just moved in. Just temporarily, they need time to get back on their feet. I looked at her. Not with anger. Just emptiness. And my room? You don't live here anymore. That room was empty. She said it lightly. Besides, your apartment now is much nicer. I wanted to laugh, but my throat tightened. As I walked out the door, I didn't look back. I only caught Kelsey's voice, drifting from the room. Mia's apartment really is beautiful. So close to the city, upscale interior. Just pack a bag and move in. And I knew a storm was coming. 2 weeks later, I returned again at my mother's invitation for another family dinner. I hesitated, but didn't want to seem distant or cold. I picked a simple blue dress, not flashy, but just enough to remind them I wasn't the same Mia they remembered. I stepped inside, and the cold hit me even with the heater on. Dylan lounged on the couch like he owned the place. Kelsey scrolled on her phone without even looking up. My mom was ladling soup. My dad, per usual, hid behind his newspaper. "Hi everyone," I said. "Yeah," Dylan muttered, eyes glued to the screen. During dinner, my mom started talking about Dylan's plans for a new startup, this time, an organic pet food delivery service. I almost choked. "Really? After losing everything with the transport company?" I asked bluntly. "Mia," my mom scolded, "don't mock. Dylan has an entrepreneurial spirit. Not everyone's like you, sitting in an air-conditioned office, collecting a steady paycheck." Kelsey chimed in, voice dripping with sarcasm. "If you're so talented, why not start your own business? Or are you planning to be an employee forever and call that freedom?" I set down my spoon and took a deep breath. At least I'm not burning other people's money chasing delusions. The air turned to ice. Dylan slammed his hand on the table, eyes blazing. "What do you know about risk? Sitting safe while looking down on people who dare to take chances." I gave a cold smile. "You mean taking chances? With Mom and Dad's money?" For the first time that night, Dad spoke up, his voice sharp. "Enough. This is our home, not a place to tear each other down. Mia, if you can't say anything nice, then don't speak at all." I stood up, heart numb. But before I left, I turned to my mom. "If you're planning to make my life Dylan's safety net again, just know one thing. This time, I won't stay quiet." She didn't respond, but in her eyes, I didn't see guilt. I saw calculation. Driving home, I glanced at the rearview mirror. The city lights glowed behind me. My apartment waited ahead, quiet, clean, untouched. But I knew. If they had already taken over my childhood room, what they were after next wouldn't just be memories. I got home on a Wednesday evening, exhausted after back-to-back meetings. My mind had one mission: reheat leftover lasagna, queue up the latest episode of Gracefield Heights, and collapse into my favorite armchair. But when the elevator doors opened on the 6th floor, I froze. My apartment door was open. I walked closer, one step at a time. Laughter echoed inside. Dylan's voice. Then my mom's. And faintly, Kelsey's. My heart pounded. I pushed the door open, and what I saw made my blood rush to my head. Dylan stood in the middle of the living room, arms crossed like he was evaluating a model home. Kelsey sat with her legs crossed on the sofa, running her hand across the cushion like a seasoned homebuyer. My mom stood near the balcony, nodding in approval as she looked at the lavender plant I had grown myself. "What are you doing here?" I asked, each word tight and sharp. My mom turned around, showing no hint of surprise. "Oh, you're home? I was just showing Dylan and Kelsey the apartment." "What's the big deal? I'm still the property owner." I froze. "This is my home, I live here." "I know, but you never signed a formal lease, and even if you had, I still have the right to show it to family." Her voice was soft, but ice cold. I looked at Dylan, then Kelsey. They said nothing, but their eyes said everything. They knew. They had planned this. "That's enough," I said, trying to stay calm. "You all need to leave, now." My mom smirked. "How about this, Mia? If you want to keep living here, I think it's time to adjust the rent. With all the improvements you made, the apartment's value has gone up significantly. I checked the market. Going rate now is triple what you're paying." I stood still. "Triple?" "Yes. And I think that's fair. Dylan and Kelsey need a place. You can either pay the new rate, or move out. I stepped back, barely believing my ears. You're joking, right? Think what you want. But I'll be sending a formal notice. You have 1 week to decide. She turned, waving for Dylan to follow. Let's go, we've got things to do. Dylan looked at me. Didn't say a word. Kelsey gave a mocking smirk, picked up her purse, and brushed past me, like I was a hotel maid she didn't plan to tip. The door slammed shut behind them. I stood alone in the apartment I had built with after-work hours, hammer swings, and every saved dollar. The walls I had painted myself, the furniture I picked piece by piece. Now trophies that others were ready to claim with a single sentence. I sank to the floor, leaned my head back against the wall. Numb, no tears, no rage. Just hollow. A thought appeared in my mind, as clear as if it were written in red ink. They never saw me as family, just a tool. That same night, I opened my laptop and logged into a rental app. Not because I was being kicked out, but because I would never beg to stay in a place I had built on my own. By midnight, I had browsed over 20 listings, and when I saw the 1-bedroom apartment in South End, just a 5-minute walk from my new office, I knew immediately that would be the next place. The next morning, I took a day off, my first in 3 years. At 9:00 a.m., I met the new landlord. By 10:00, I signed the lease. At 10:30, I paid the deposit. My apartment. On paper. In ink. No one could question it, no one could take it. I called the moving company. They arrived at 2:00 p.m. I had labeled everything in the apartment. Every item I'd bought with my own money. Bookshelves, lamps, the sofa, dining table, rug, coffee maker. All of it. Each piece was marked, Maya's. By 3:00 p.m. the apartment was empty. White walls. Clean floors. Only one thing left. The ratty old sofa my mom once told me to just leave behind for now. And now, it was the only thing they truly deserved. I dropped the keys in an envelope and slid it through my parents' mail slot on the way out. No words. No tears. Just one clear thought. The game is over, and this time, I'm not the pawn. I didn't cry, I didn't yell. I just acted. The next morning, before the sun had fully broken through the frosted window pane, I had already completed the rental form for the South End apartment. The one I knew no one could enter unless I allowed it. At 9:00 a.m., I signed the final documents, and looked up at Ms. Janet, the landlord. A tough woman with eyes that seemed to read straight through me. Can I move in today? I asked, voice even. She squinted slightly. Don't tell me you just got kicked out? Not exactly. Let's just say I kicked myself out before anyone else could try. She laughed and nodded. Good. I like people like you. Direct. Decisive. At exactly 10:00 a.m., I paid the deposit and got the new keys. A 1-bedroom unit, light wood floors, natural light, open kitchen, soft ash-gray walls. No traces of my family, and that was the best part. Next, I called the moving company. We specialize in same-day moving, their ad echoed in my head like a lifeline. I need to move within 4 hours. Pickup is my old apartment on Mayflower Street. I need everything except the fridge and the stove. Do you have a list ready? The operator asked, all business. I looked down at the list I'd written out the night before. Great crate and barrel sofa. Walnut dining table. 6 linen upholstered chairs. DIY bookshelf. Reading lamp. Breville espresso machine. Handwoven wool rug. Olive green bed linen set. 55-inch TV. Stab cookware and kitchen set. Yes, everything's mine, I have receipts. I confirmed the appointment. The truck would arrive by 2:00 p.m. From 11:00 a.m. to 1:30 p.m. I worked like a machine, Labeled every item, MIAs. Set aside the things I wasn't taking. Took down the curtains, packed the lamps, rolled each rug, disassembled the wall shelves. No music, no phone, just me. And a silence that spoke louder than words. I wasn't leaving anything behind for traitors. At 2:05 p.m., the truck arrived. 3 movers in blue uniforms stepped in, glancing around the apartment filled with clearly labeled items. Take everything marked Mia's. Leave the rest untouched. 45 minutes later, the apartment was empty. White ceilings, cold floors, and the old sagging sofa I once considered tossing sat alone in the middle of the living room. A perfect symbol of what was left after a family had rotted from within. I took the key, placed it in an envelope, and wrote my mom's name clearly on the front. To Mrs. Linda Weston. The woman who once called this family property. I drove past my parents' house without stopping, got out, slid the envelope through the door slot silently. No words. No note. Then I drove straight to my new apartment. For the first time in my life, moving into a place because I chose it. Not because someone suggested it, not because someone arranged it. That night, I turned on the living room lights and looked around. Everything was still scattered, but I didn't feel tired. I felt free. Every object I saw was the result of my own effort, not a compromise. I opened a bottle of Cabernet I'd been saving since last year, put on soft jazz. Then I sank into the sofa, my sofa, and took a sip of deep red wine. And right at that moment, my phone buzzed. Dylan? Kelsey. Back to back. The messages lit up like gunfire. Mia, what the hell are you doing? The apartment's empty, everything's gone. Stop being so selfish, Dylan doesn't even have a bed. I thought you were a better person than this. I stared at the screen, glowing bright. Not one apology. Not a single explanation. Just blame. From the same people who tried to kick me out of the home I built. I hit mute all, then I blocked each one. But Dylan. Kelsey. Dad. I deleted the family group chat. Removed them from my contacts. Each name, each memory. Like pulling splinters from my skin. I didn't feel guilty. I just felt at peace. I knew a phone call would come eventually. But I didn't expect it at 7:00 a.m., just as I was finishing my first cup of coffee in the new kitchen. The only place untouched by guilt and grief. The screen lit up. Mom, Linda Weston. I let it ring 3 times, then answered. Her voice came instantly, no greeting, no hesitation. Mia, what are you trying to pull? I took a sip of coffee, keeping my voice even. What are you talking about? Don't play dumb. The apartment's empty. You took everything, the dining set, the living room rug. Dylan and Kelsey have nothing. I pressed my lips together, firm. I only took what I bought. Every single item in that apartment was paid for, built, and arranged by me. Would you like to see the receipts? Silence. Then her tone changed, no longer angry but cold, razor sharp. That apartment is still mine. And you still have responsibilities. What responsibilities? I set my cup down. Rent. I'm still paying off Dylan's loan, and now he has no income. If you can't cover the full amount, the least you can do is split it. I laughed, not bitterly, just finally. Let me get this straight, I said slowly. You, Dylan and his wife, barged into my home and basically demanded to take it back. Then you tripled the rent and forced me to leave. And now? You want me to pay rent so they can live there for free. Family supports each other in hard times. You know we still owe the bank. Dylan is rebuilding. What about me? I cut in, voice rising. Have you ever cared how I live, what I eat? If I'm okay, if I'm tired? When I got promoted, what did you say? Nothing. Not one word of praise. But when Dylan fails, everyone rushes to save him. You save him so hard, you threw me out of the house. Mia, don't exaggerate. I'm not. I'm being exact. I'm the one who fixed up that apartment. I painted the walls. I bought every piece of furniture. And the moment it was beautiful, you decided to hand it to Dylan like it was a reward for failing? I heard her exhale sharply, like she might hang up. But instead her voice came back, frosty, like January air. I'm truly disappointed in you. I closed my eyes, then opened them. The words I spoke next didn't shake. I no longer hoped to be understood. I just wanted clarity. So am I. I'm disappointed that I spent so many years waiting for something that never came. I always thought, if I was good enough, you'd recognize me. But now I understand. To you, I'm just a backup plan. A walking wallet. A free renovation crew. You're going too far. No. I'm finally waking up. A heavy pause, then. She whispered bitterly. Then, consider me no longer your mother. I nodded, even though she couldn't see. Fine. Because I've never really had one. I hung up, no hesitation, no turning back. Then I opened my contacts. Blocked her number. Then Dylan's. Kelsey's. Dad's too. Deleted them from every app, every group chat. I set the phone down, stood up, walked onto the balcony, and took a deep breath. The morning breeze touched my face like a silent pat on the back. It's done. I returned to the dining table and picked up my brown leather notebook. The only thing my grandmother left me before she passed. I opened to the first page, and wrote in blue ink. Starting today, I begin again. With no owed loyalty, no need for approval. I live. Because I am worth it. I know my family won't stop. There will be gossip, screenshots, relatives trying to shame me, but this time, I don't care. Because, finally, I did something I hadn't dared to do in 32 years. I chose myself. 1 week after my last phone call with my mother, I realized something clearer than ever. Silence isn't emptiness, it's space to heal. No more texts saying, "Come home for dinner." No more 9:00 p.m. calls just to ask if my salary had increased this month. No more sugar-coated words hiding sharp blades. And no more family, at least not in the way they used to chain it around my neck like a quiet leash. I began learning how to live again, from scratch. Each morning I brewed coffee, played lo-fi music, and wrote out my plans in a new notebook. No one criticized me for being too meticulous. No one mocked me for living like a robot. I made my own breakfast. Eggs Benedict, a dish I never dared to try before. At lunch I left the office on time. I no longer stayed late just to prove I was responsible. Because now I knew. No one loves you for sacrificing your life to please them. I signed up for a cooking class on Tuesday nights. The instructor's name was Olivia, with wild curly hair and a lullaby voice, but the way she held a knife made the room hold its breath. My first attempt at risotto burned and stuck to the pan. I laughed out loud in class, instead of staring down in shame like I used to when I lived under the shadow of expectations. I met new people, none of whom knew I was Linda Weston's daughter, or Dylan's once CEO sister. I was just Mia, 32 years old, a fan of miso soup and a hater of raw carrots. One Saturday morning, while reorganizing my bookshelf, I got a message from my cousin Rachel. "Did you hear? Aunt Linda is asking everyone in the family for money, for Dylan's new startup. Something about organic pet food. It's tragic, really." I stared at the screen for a while. Not angry. Not bitter. Just a feeling like watching an old movie. You already know the character will fall into the same hole again. I replied with 3 words. "Not my concern." Rachel sent a clapping emoji. I exhaled and set my phone down. In that moment, I knew I had moved on. A month passed in the blink of an eye, but long enough for me to feel the shift within. No more exhaustion at the thought of family. No more flinching when someone mentioned the word sacrifice. I used my savings to book a trip to Portland for fall. My first solo vacation in years. I enrolled in a weekend baking class. I restarted my old blog sharing my story. No names, no locations. Just a journey of a woman choosing freedom over submission. My first post was titled, I used to be the chair no one ever sat on. It got hundreds of shares. And comments from strangers, people who understood. And somehow, that comforted me more than any apology my mother could have ever offered. One late afternoon, while cleaning up the kitchen after baking cookies, the doorbell rang. A delivery woman stood there holding a cardboard box. For Mia Weston. That's me. I opened it. Inside was an envelope. No return address. The handwriting was familiar. My father's. I didn't realize things had gone this far. But your mother says if you don't come back, she'll sell the apartment. Dylan needs capital. She says it's for the family. I don't know what else to say. I folded the letter. Not angry, not shocked, just confirmed, once more, that I'd made the right choice. I picked up my phone, snapped a photo of the cookies I'd just baked, and wrote a caption. A day with no drama. Just flour, butter, and peace. Posted it, turned off Wi-Fi. No texts, no callbacks, no responses. Just me. A kitchen that smelled of vanilla. And a strangely quiet evening. I no longer needed to be seen by my family, because now I knew. I still exist, radiant and whole. Even without them. On Sunday afternoon, I sat alone on the third-floor balcony, a hot cup of chamomile tea in hand, and a book still open on the table. The golden hour sun slid across my shoulder, casting soft orange streaks on the tile. A breeze carried cinnamon from a neighbor's window, and sparrows chirped on the nearby rooftop. Everything felt strangely peaceful. I hadn't realized how far I'd come. Not geographically, but emotionally. Just 2 months ago, I still called the apartment I rebuilt with my own hands home, only to be forced out like a tenant overstaying their welcome. Just 8 weeks ago, I was still sitting at family dinners flavored with BBQ and bitterness, where my name got passed over in favor of Dylan's endless praise. Just 60 days ago, I still believed that blood ties meant I had to endure. But no. I see the truth now, clearer than ever. Family supports one another, they always said, but no one ever asked how many times I supported them. How many months I sent quiet transfers to help pay off Dylan's debts. How many parties I worked in the kitchen from morning to night just to save face for my mother. How many failures of the golden sun I sat through, while my own accomplishments were ignored. They called it adult sacrifice. I call it selfish exploitation. And the cost of prolonged silence was me, given up, without thanks, without apology. I took a sip of tea, just enough to warm my throat. On the table, my phone lay face down. I didn't check it every 5 minutes anymore. I no longer waited for a "how are you" message. Because I knew, if I had to beg for care, it was never real. I learned something important. Real love doesn't have to be begged for. And support should never be a one-way street. People often say, "But she's still your mother." But if someone uses that title to guilt, to take, to manipulate, then that relationship isn't sacred, it's a trap. I remembered the look in my mother's eyes that day. Not sadness, not hurt, but rage that she no longer had control over me. And Dylan? The way he silently let it all happen, like being prioritized was his birthright, that said everything. I once believed that if I tried hard enough, they'd change, that they'd finally see me as part of them, someone to be proud of, to love. But now I know. Instead of trying to change them, I've changed the way I face them. I don't need revenge. I don't need to prove a point. I just want to live a life not governed by guilt. The church bells rang in the distance. I leaned back in my chair, watching the sky fade to indigo. The city lights blinked on. My new apartment was no longer a temporary shelter. It was a true home. A place no one could take away, no one could price, no one could call a favor. I remembered my recent conversation with Rachel. She said my parents were selling an old car to raise funds for Dylan's organic pet meal. a startup that sounded like a summer joke. I asked. Have they asked anyone else? Rachel replied, half laughing, half sighing. Pretty much the whole family. Someone even said, "Why isn't Mia helping anymore? She used to." I shrugged. Yeah, I used to. That was it. No bitterness. No resentment. Just a quiet confirmation that I had closed that chapter. I stood up, gathered my teacup and book. Before going inside, I turned to look at the city one last time. Inside me there was no more noise. Just a silence that carried weight. I used to think family was something unchangeable, but the truth is, family isn't just blood, it's how people treat one another. I can still love, still forgive, but I will never forget. Because forgetting leaves the door open for history to repeat itself. Remembering, that's how you protect yourself. And I will live. Not in anyone's shadow. Not under anyone's expectations. Just me. Mia Weston. A woman who finally learned. True family doesn't demand that love means one-sided sacrifice. Mia's story is a powerful reminder that family bonds cannot survive if only one person is constantly giving. Family should never be an excuse to manipulate, exploit, or devalue someone. Mia chose to step out of the cycle of blind sacrifice to live a life that's truly her own. Free, peaceful, and full of self-respect. Sometimes, growth begins the moment we dare to say enough, even to those we love most. What do you think about Mia's decision? Would you have done the same if you were in her shoes? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to follow the channel for more moving, thought-provoking stories about family and self-worth.